Welcome to History's Influence. Christianity and Islam had divided the Mediterranean world for centuries before there were any crusades to speak of. But in 1095, Pope Urban II had made a drastic call to action. He had initiated the First Crusade, both to help out the flailing Byzantines against the Seljuk Turks, and to recapture the holy city of Jerusalem, the location of Jesus Christ's crucifixion. A crusade was a holy war fought in the name of Christ, targeting the church's enemies and granting the remission of sins for participants. The strongly religious society of Europe accepted this mission. The worldly desires for pillaging, land, and trade privileges also supported such efforts. This far-fetched plan, requiring the coordination of numerous squabbling leaders over a distant land, was actually a resounding success. So the First Crusade was followed by the establishment of 4 Crusader kingdoms in the Levant. But this success was not to last. Further crusades would ultimately fail, with the final stronghold of Acre being captured by the Mamluk Sultanate in 1291, nearly 200 years after the initial First Crusade. But what if the Crusades were instead successful? What implications would this have upon Christian and Islamic civilization, to Europe and the Middle East? Would the Crescent submit to the Cross in perpetuity? All these questions and more will be answered in this alternate history. To have the Crusaders ultimately triumph, we're going to be changing the outcome of the Third Crusade. This crusade was strong in religious fervour, both on the side of the Crusaders and on the side of the Islamic Ayyubid Empire. This new state was founded and led by the famous Salah al-Din, better known in English as Saladin. He is known to have been pious, honourable, generous, and diplomatic. Uniting the regions of Egypt and Syria in opposition to the Crusader states, Saladin had reconquered Jerusalem from the Christians in 1187. He nearly annexed the entirety of the Crusader states in the Levant, initiating the call for a Third Crusade by Pope Gregory VIII. On the side of the Christians led the tall, handsome, well-spoken, educated, and chivalric Richard the Lionheart. He was King of England and technically Lord of half of France. He was squabbling for leadership with one of the greatest kings of France, Philip II Augustus, who he would prevail against, leading the Crusade as a result. Whilst travelling to the Holy Land by sea, Richard conquered Cyprus from a rebellious nobleman of Byzantium, who allied with Saladin. Reaching the Levant, Richard and Philip were able to siege and capture Acre after fierce resistance from the Muslims. Philip II would leave as he contracted an illness. He was also outshined by Richard, and he wished to consolidate his personal territory in France against Richard and other noblemen. After the surrender of Acre, Saladin harassed the Crusader invasion force, which Richard led down the Levantine coast, supplied by sea. There was disagreement on attacking Jerusalem. Richard approached the city twice, but didn't have the forces needed to successfully siege it. So, a stalemate was eventually reached. The Treaty of Ramla was eventually signed in 1192, ending the Crusade. In this treaty, the Crusader states had some land on the Levantine coast restored, but it was the shadow of what they held previously. So, for the Crusades to be a success, we're going to assume they do pursue an attack on Jerusalem. To have this succeed, Richard and Philip will need to make way for the original leader of the Crusade. This would be the famous Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick Barbarossa, who drowned in a river in Armenian Cilicia on his way to the Crusade. He travelled on foot as opposed to Richard or Philip's naval transportation, and only 1/3 of Frederick's army would go on to fight the Crusade. Therefore, having this redhead leading the Crusade will have numerous benefits. He will outrank the two kings and therefore lead the Crusade without quarrelling. The total army size will be much larger. There will be uniform leadership and harsh discipline enacted onto the armies, as he implemented when travelling to the Crusade. Barbarossa's military experience, take his experience in the failed siege of Damascus in the Second Crusade, would come into use. Finally, Frederick's fame, ambition, organisation skills, battlefield competency, and political perspicacity will all be put into good use. With a successful crusade, the borders of the Crusader states will be restored to what they were prior to Islamic intervention, the intended goal of the Third Crusade. After the Crusade, Barbarossa is going to soon die. He was 67 years old. Even if we assume he makes it another decade or two, the Holy Roman Empire isn't going to be drastically changed by any new reforms. He's not going to desire to do so at such an age. Philip and Richard will return home around the same time they did as in our timeline. A rebellious French baron happened to kill Richard with a crossbow in our timeline, which the butterfly effect will prevent. But I believe Philip's strong leadership in France is going to expand his power base in opposition to Richard regardless. He was starting this process even before the Third Crusade, so I don't think the history between England and France is going to change drastically. Saladin's newly formed Ayyubid Empire was a loose confederation, usurping the Zengid and Fatimid dynasties. It was based upon Saladin's military strength, diplomacy, and cause for religious war against the Crusader states. Facing a humiliating defeat to the Crusaders, this empire will be collapsing in its infancy. Saladin died of fever soon after the Third Crusade in our own timeline, but he will be deposed, even if he doesn't catch a fever. Saladin's brother and successor Aladil I was administering Egypt for Saladin before and during the Third Crusade. So in this new timeline, Aladil will seize power and establish rule over Egypt. He was a skilled administrator and conqueror in our own timeline. He also pursued effective diplomacy with the Crusader states, meaning in this new timeline, he will reach a peaceful arrangement with the Christians. Looking northwards, numerous powers prevailed in the Islamic world. For example, the Zengid dynasty still held weakened control from Mosul. There was also the Sultanate of Rum. The Sultanate of Rum, led by the Seljuk Turks, who commonly clashed with the Byzantine Empire. The Crusaders will be aware of these potential threats and the past consequences of not keeping the Muslims in check. They will receive help from new crusading settlers who would stay after the Third Crusade. This would allow them to capitalize on the power vacuum that Saladin left so they could expand their holdings. This would be similar to the Kingdom of Jerusalem's expansion under King Baldwin I, after the successful First Crusade. The Kingdom of Jerusalem will capture the strategically significant city of Damascus, which they failed to take in the Second Crusade. This capture would help split the Islamic world in half. A key point to mention is the choke point city of Ascalon will be seized by the Crusaders after their Third Crusade victory, so they would be better able to prevent Egyptian support to Syrian powers. Skillful monarchs won't be needed for the acquisition of Damascus and further lands, due to the fresh Crusader blood and weakness of the Muslims. It's not like the ruling monarchs of this period were incompetent. Anyway, the Crusaders will go on to conquer Aleppo and its surrounding regions, with the Seljuks and Zengids also expanding. The four Crusader states themselves will lose their namesakes through their additional conquests, alongside new principalities possibly arising. To defend against the Seljuks or Zengids, they will develop closer ties with each other. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, controlling the Holy Land, Ascalon and Damascus, will end up enveloping the smaller states, allowing dukes to retain their statuses, take the Duke of Antioch, within an expanded kingdom. The strategically convenient island of Cyprus will be conquered. It was ruled by a claimant and previous king of Jerusalem by this point after all. The Crusaders will befriend and intermarry with Armenian Cilicia as they had before, with the Armenians becoming nominal vassals of this enlarged kingdom. This restored and expanded Kingdom of Jerusalem will retain much of its old trappings, but will change to meet new demands. In our timeline, the nobles, vassals, and officers of state all presided within Jerusalem, so they held a larger influence on monarchs compared to the larger distances present with noblemen in European states. Due to the state's expansion, the elites will disperse among different territories, under dukes and such. This would reduce the influence they held over the monarch. It would also reduce the factionalism between the nobles and the court. It's also argued that feudalism had fossilized within the kingdom because there was too much warfare and there weren't enough Westerners. But with the expanded power base, they'd be a more secure kingdom, and the new arrivals as well will both contribute to a centralization. The High Court, with its legislative and judicial powers, will remain in effect. Speaking more broadly, the administrative system of the kingdom is surprisingly well documented. They'll expand it where they need to. The largest collection of surviving medieval laws actually comes from the kingdom, the Assizes of Jerusalem. The economy of the kingdom was far more commercial than agricultural, thanks to its Levantine coast, but we'll see a larger agricultural base with the acquisition of Syria in this new timeline. Their wealth would increase substantially as a result. One place this wealth may be spent is in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This was the home base of the monarchs. It's considered the holiest site of Christianity. It's purported to have the sites where Jesus was crucified, the location of his empty tomb, etc. This is displayed in key art and locations, which are often tourist attractions. But much of the art, paintings, and mosaics created by the Crusaders were destroyed by the Mamluks in our own timeline, so these are going to be preserved. The Crusaders had expanded the beauty and magnificence of the church, and will continue to do so in this new timeline. Speaking of architecture, we see many famous castles survive even to this day thanks to the Crusaders. But many more will be built and will survive with a longer lasting Crusader kingdom. With more land and wealth comes an expanded army, which in this timeline would be more effective in defending the kingdom. Mercenaries, which the kingdom tended to rely upon, will be easier to hire. There were native Christian troops which were used as well, this won't be changing. Their army's leadership consisted of barons and knights like in Europe, mostly French in origin. Furthermore, free settlers from Europe were expected to serve as sergeants. Of course, the Crusader orders would be important to mention, which were mostly founded in the Levant by French settlers. Take the Knights Hospitaller, or the Templar Knights. These were military and civilian orders, who would help Christian pilgrims and run hospitals, for example. The Templars will maintain their extensive banking system in Europe. In this new timeline, the Templars are going to have too strong of a base within Jerusalem to be persecuted and dismantled. The French king and the Pope won't be torturing and executing the Templars, as they did in 1307. This will strengthen Jerusalem's soft power in Europe, which they would leverage for future crusading. Additionally, these holy orders will ultimately remain subservient to the kingdom, as they were in our timeline, content with their key roles in military and domestic affairs. The Teutonic Order, founded in Acre after its successful capture in the Third Crusade, would later go on to conquer the pagan lands of Prussia. This will still be occurring, but their pull in the distant Levant won't stop them from being conquered by the Polish, as they were in our own timeline. Moving back to the Holy Land, how would the Crusader elite fare in their kingdom? The Frankish elite in the historical kingdom were small in number, approximately 15 to 25% of the population, although estimates are hard to get accurate. They were mostly French soldiers and knights, a rough and hardened people. They came to respect the local Greek and Syriac Christian majority, alongside the Muslim Sunni and Shia Arabs. Whilst the Levant was predominantly Christian, the larger Muslim populations of Syria won't change the Crusaders' ultimately tolerant approach. This wasn't all hunky-dory though. The French primarily stayed within their own communities, or would be adjacent to local Christians if they had to be. The Muslims couldn't live in the city of Jerusalem, for example. The Crusader settlers from the Third Crusade will assimilate into this ruling class. Even with the larger Holy Roman, so German, contingent, they will still assimilate into French culture. Future migrations just won't be meaningful enough to tip this balance, as they weren't in our timeline. Colonial migration to the Americas would be more lucrative and appealing, for example. This ruling class will remain in power for a long time, perhaps centuries, despite their lack of numbers. An example of a dominant military-based minority, ruling in the Middle East, would be the Mamluks. They were foreign slave soldiers from the Russian steppe and later Caucasus, who would revolt and take power from their Ayyubid overlords. Would there be any future crusades giving the resounding success of the Third? The Fourth Crusade in our timeline aimed to recapture Jerusalem from the Ayyubids, although they were redirected to sack Constantinople and conquer most of the Christian Byzantine Empire. But this desire for Jerusalem won't exist in this new timeline. So, will an equivalent crusade still occur? The Byzantines were afraid of Catholic conquest since the First Crusade, thanks to large Crusader armies crossing their capital and being a bit rivalrous, if you will. These greedy and opportunistic barbarians were not to be trusted, you see. Such distaste was expanded upon in Constantinople, with the massacre of Italian traders in 1182. But Enrico Dandolo, Doge of Venice, would not have a Byzantine succession crisis to take advantage of. He couldn't place a claimant on the throne, and prey on the bad views towards the schismatic Easterners, leading to the Fourth Crusade going as it did. The reason Enrico led the crusade in the first place was the indebted lesser nobleman. They were indebted to his naval transportation services, but with a victorious Third Crusade led by an emperor and kings, I think we're going to see more high-class noblemen pursue crusades who can actually afford to do so. With the capture of Syria, the Kingdom of Jerusalem is going to develop a close alliance with the Byzantines to aid against their mutual Islamic enemies. So for the reasons we've discussed, we're not going to see a Fourth Crusade style situation occur in this new timeline. I've already made a video detailing how the Byzantines would fare without a Fourth Crusade, but to summarise, the Mongols will shatter the power base of the Seljuks, allowing the Byzantines to reconquer Anatolia. The Byzantines will use this re-established power base to reconquer regions such as Bulgaria. The great schism between Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy won't be mended, however, although relations will improve between the churches without a Fourth Crusade or whatnot. But centuries-long differences won't be easily undone, in addition to Byzantium's renewed confidence and strength. Venice won't be as strong of a power, but the broad political situation of Italy and the Renaissance will still occur in a similar fashion. Looking past the Fourth Crusade, future crusades are still going to happen. Establishing a crusader state in the fertile region of Egypt would be desirable for daring adventurers, excited from the successful Christian acquisition of the Levant and Syria. The 5th and 7th Crusades failed to take Egypt in our timeline, but with a strong Jerusalemite backing, Egypt will be conquered, whether it takes 1 crusade or 2 or 3. You see, the Kingdom of Jerusalem is going to want to keep their western flank secure, so they're going to push heavily for this crusade. A new kingdom will be established, with its capital in Alexandria, as opposed to the Muslim capital of Cairo. This would allow for easier communication with Europe. This state will likely be predominated by Frenchmen as Jerusalem was, following a similar governmental structure. The Arabization and Islamification of the Christian Copts in Egypt, who are the descendants of the ancient Egyptians, will be halted in this new timeline, roughly splitting the Coptic Arabic population in even proportions. The population numbers from the period are too unclear to allow for more precision, however. In any case, the Mamluk slave soldiers, originally serving the Ayyubids, will never be coming to power, as they would be expelled from this new kingdom as a military force that wouldn't be desired. Looking to the east, the Mongols will go on to conquer the Khwarezmian Empire in Persia. Many Khwarezmian soldiers fled to the Levant, where they conquered lands from their weakened Crusader states in our own timeline. The Kingdom of Jerusalem will be able to fight back in this new timeline with their increased military strength, preventing any land losses. But then the Mongols would arrive. The mobile tactics of the Mongols were countered well by the Mamluks, who expelled them from Syria, but the Crusaders didn't hold the same advantages. With their strong fortifications, they will prevent themselves from being annexed wholesale, but they're going to lose much of Syria. They'd become a weakened quasi-vassal state of the Crusader Kingdom of Egypt. It's a bit ironic given what they did to centralize their kingdoms initially. Following the Mongols, the Byzantines and Crusaders would work together to counter any Islamic powers, which try to conquer them from the east. So with such security, Crusades in this new timeline will be seen as the successful expansion of European power. This is in opposition to the contentious and ultimately doomed historical fluke which they are perceived to be in our own timeline. Thanks to key contributions from the Second Crusade, such as the capture of Lisbon, still occurring, the Reconquista in Spain and Portugal will still be a success, and they'll still be enveloped within the framework of crusading. The Islamic world will be split into two, with their third holiest city of Jerusalem captured, and their holiest cities of Mecca and Medina under threat. They would presumably see this as punishment from Allah, similar to the Mongol sack of Baghdad in 1258. This will give strong incentive for a strong warlord to rectify this error. He would attempt to expel the Crusaders, which could be done permanently, as the French would be a small foreign minority. The chances or success of this would be too difficult to predict, so we'll be leaving it there for this video. This has been History's Influence. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Catch you later.